Owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends, I hope the day finds you well because we have gathered to talk about the top 10 most valuable cards from Streets of New Capenna. Here's how it works. The values that we're using are based on the prices today, which is April 30th. So if you're watching this on another day, then bear in mind that these values may have changed. With that being said, let's start at number 10 with Jetmir Nexus of Revels. He's coming in at $8 and we are dealing with Canadian prices here, my friends. So Jetmir Nexus of Revels, the Party Lord, is 1 white, 1 red, 1 green, and 1 for a 5/4 legendary cat demon, because all 5 of the crime lords of Capenna have been infused with demon essence, if you didn't know that. It's a pretty funky little backstory to it, and if you're interested in the backstory to Capenna, I'll leave a link up on the screen at the end of this video with the Capenna storyline for you. So, Jetmir leads the cabaret. He's all about partying and having a ton of people around, and that is reflected in his abilities. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have vigilance as long as you control 3 or more creatures. And he also gives an additional +1/+0 and trample as long as you have 6 or more creatures. And if you have a full party going on with 9 or more creatures, you get an additional +1/+0 and double strike. So ultimately, when you look at him through the lens of having your full party array, he is pretty beefy, right? You're paying 4 mana for essentially what is going to be an 8/4 vigilance, trample, double striker, and all of your other creatures also have vigilance, trample, and double strike. Now, obviously, if you don't have any creatures out other than him, he becomes far less impressive, but he still does have a beefy enough body that this is a card to reckon with, and the artwork is fun. You got Jetmir standing there in his party attire, ready to go. So that's number 10. Number 9 is another leader of a crime family, Zeatora the Incinerator. 1 green, 1 red, 1 black, and 3 for a 6/6 flying demon dragon. Zeatora's on the same level as Jetmir, coming in at $8. So this 6/6 flyer says, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, Zeatora the Incinerator deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target, and you create 3 treasure tokens. Now, I should say about both Zeatora and Jetmir, they do feel like cards that at the beginning may kind of take a dip in terms of prices, but over time are going to scale upwards because they really do scream, play me in a commander deck, and they have fun, big abilities, right? Now, let's move on to a non-legendary creature, a giant building, the Titan of Industry. So Titan of Industry is our number 8 card, coming in at $10. This mythic rare is a gigantic 7/7 for 7 mana, and 3 of those mana are green. So obviously you need to be going heavy green to be able to swing with this Titan. So it's an elemental with reach and trample. So all of a sudden you're getting this gigantic beast, but at the same time, when it enters the battlefield, you get to make the choice of 2 of the following abilities. You can either destroy an artifact or enchantment, target player gains 5 life, create a 4/4 green Rhino Warrior creature token, or put a shield counter on a creature you control. And a shield counter will prevent a creature from being destroyed or from taking damage once, right? So that is a solid little ability. And having this range of options on top of having a massive beastly body makes this card something to be reckoned with. And also, it can be brought back into play. It can be cheated into play. You don't have to worry about meeting any extra conditions. Regardless of how the Titan comes out, you end up getting the benefits from this. So this is a gigantic green beef lord. And considering I'm a huge mono green fan, I do like what this card does, and it is pretty silly to go around and have a building punching people. That is definitely different. Moving on to number 7, we have Elspeth resplendent. And honestly, Elspeth looks absolutely lovely on this card. So 2 white and 3 for a 5 loyalty version. Now, her +1 is choose up to 1 target creature, put a +1/+1 counter and a counter from among flying, first strike, lifelink, or vigilance onto it. -3, look at the top 7 cards of your library. If you want to, you can put a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield with a shield counter on it. You put the rest on the bottom of your library. And -7, create 5 3/3 white angel creature tokens with flying. These are all feel-good abilities. The first one beefs up a creature while giving it a range of different choices for abilities, and you can do a build a monster by slapping all these abilities onto one creature. The fact that you can also dig deeply into your deck, 7 cards off of your library out of a 60-card deck is huge, right? You get to grab something that costs 3 or less, which may not be that great later game, but at the same time, you get to put the shield counter on it, which gives you additional value from it. And on top of that, the card that you bring back from the graveyard doesn't have to be a creature, right? So you could bring back a non-creature permanent with a shield counter on it, which makes it that much harder to get rid of. Could be useful with artifacts or enchantments, right? Or even planeswalkers. Either way, a versatile ability. And the ultimate, just slapping a bunch of angels on the board, is also really, really strong. So it's no surprise that Elspeth is coming in at $12. This is one that I'm not sure where she's going to go, right? I mean, she does have a nice range of abilities, but at the same time, that 5 casting cost is steep for the standard environment. Standard is pretty breakneck in terms of speed, right? And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Moving on, we are moving up to number 6, and that is Urabrask, the Heretic Praetor. All right, now, this is the one divergent Praetor. Unlike the other 4 Phyrexian Praetors who are trying to spread Phyrexia and take over the entire multiverse, essentially, now in the name of Elish Norn, Urabrask still believes in Phyrexia, but like a free Phyrexia, not under the domination of Norn, so is actively working against the rest of the Phyrexians and working with Tezzeret. So there is some interesting Phyrexian action going on, but we definitely didn't get enough details in the Capenna story for me to really feel satisfied overall. I want to know more about what's going on. But anyways, this is 2 red and 3 for a 4/4 haste Phyrexian Praetor. At the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, exile the top card of their library. They may play it this turn. So it's accelerating your, not your draw really, but your access to cards overall by giving you an extra card to play each turn. And it's limiting your opponent's plays to just being that turn. Can you use the card right when you get it? No? Well, then you don't get it. And that is a pretty powerful effect. And it does kind of stick with the concept of the Phyrexian Praetors having these sort of at least somewhat symmetrical abilities where it hits your opponent and you with something along the same flavor line, right? So Urabrask coming in at $12. Also coming in at $12 is our number 5, and that is Lord Xander the Collector. Now, this guy is a huge casting cost, right? A black, a red, a blue, and 4 for a 6/6 vampire demon noble. When Lord Xander the Collector enters the battlefield, target opponent discards half the cards in their hand, rounded down. Whenever he attacks, defending player mills half their library, rounded down. And when he dies, target opponent sacrifices half the non-land permanents they control, rounded down. This is awesome. Do you know what I mean? Like, it has such that gut feel-good ability where it's like, okay, as soon as he shows up, he takes half your opponent's resources from their hand. That feels great. Yes, I mean, admittedly, based on his casting cost, sure, maybe they've cast a bunch of their spells. But just when you read the card from the gut feeling, you're like, yeah, you lose half your hand. And every time he swings, half of your deck is gone, just taking your resources yet again. And then Xander again ends off with even with my dying breath, I will strike out at you, and you will lose half of what you own in this epic eye for an eye mob war style concept, right? And just the idea, you're losing all these things because Xander is collecting them. Look what he has in the background. He's got all these angelic statues, and actually, based on the lore of Capenna, some of these statues would have angels still inside of them, but he's got all these fine works of art and everything. The Maestros are a pretty funky group. They were originally the aristocrats of old Capenna, and basically Xander was this old vampire whose time was pretty much over and he was being eclipsed by others. But because he was greedy and petty, one of the demon lords singled him out to become a champion, and he was infused with demon essence. And then he spent basically the entire existence of New Capenna collecting all these ancient artifacts and trying to remember his own history, because part of the creation of New Capenna involved, as far as I understand, a broker contract or something like that actually stripped the memories away from a number of individuals, and Xander is one of those. So for me, this guy is a really cool part of the Capenna story. All right, now let us move on to the number 4 card, which is the Halo Fountain. 1 white and 2 for an artifact that has 3 abilities that are based around untapping tapped creatures. Pay 1 white and tap it, untap a tapped creature you control. Create a 1/1 green-white citizen creature token. For 2 white and untapping 2 creatures, you draw a card. And for 5 white and untapping 15 tapped creatures, you win the game. So this is a fun win con. The idea of building up 15 different creatures and using them. I mean, you can swing in with a bunch of creatures to try and get them tapped, but ultimately using different tap abilities is probably going to serve you better. But I like the fact that it generates creatures for you, it lets you draw cards, and it lets you get extra uses out of your creatures. You can swing with them and then untap them. It's a fun play on the old Lorwyn block untap symbol they used to have that we had for a very brief time in Magic. It kind of evokes that as well. And the idea behind it flavor-wise is that it's this opulent display of wealth. This is literally angelic essence that's just being blasted out in this fountain. The same way that ancient rulers who lived out in desert tribes would have these little oases built where they would have fountains blasting up water in the middle of the desert as a display of their power and wealth. That's exactly what's happening right here. It's a decadent display of wealth. And speaking of wealth, the Halo Fountain is one of the more expensive cards from the set, coming in at $15. After that, we actually have a 5-way tie, and that's because we're dealing with the triomes. So this is technically actually a top 14 cards from the Streets of New Capenna set. So you've got the 5 triomes that go across the 5 combinations, right? So you've got Forest, Plains, Island, whatever, what have you. Spara's Headquarters, for example, is the white, green, blue, Forest, Plains, Island variation. They all enter the battlefield tapped. They all cycle for 3 mana, so you can pitch them to draw a card. These are a big deal. This is continuing the cycle that was created in Ikoria originally. These are the lands that you basically just want to grab them, hang on to them, right? Because most likely you're going to end up with a scenario where they're just going to be more desirable over time, and Wizards does like to hold back on reprinting things too much. Plus, another thing I really want to point out about this is look at the names of these cards, right? They're all specifically tied into individuals from New Capenna. Spara's Headquarters can only be in New Capenna, and that limits the reprint options for cards like these. You won't be able to see them reprinted in a standard set. You can't put Spara's Headquarters into a Dominaria set. You can't put it into Ravnica. Do you understand what I'm saying that way? So they'll only reprint these cards in other sets like Modern Horizons, Double Masters, which will come back at a higher price tag. So I can't state anything definitively, obviously, but since we're talking financially here, these triomes, to me, are essentially the most important thing to pay attention to in this set, okay? That being said, let's move on to the number 2, because those are all tied at 3. So number 2 in the list is Luxior, Giada's Gift. this is a very, very interesting legendary artifact equipment. And the reason for that is because you can equip it onto planeswalkers. So it gives equipped creatures +1/+1 for each counter on it. And equipped permanent isn't a planeswalker and is a creature in addition to its other types. Loyalty abilities can still be activated. So for 1 mana, you can equip this to any of your planeswalkers. They're no longer considered planeswalkers. They're now creatures, but they can still activate their loyalty abilities. And they will have +1/+1 for every loyalty counter they already have. And you can grow that by activating their increasing loyalty abilities as well. On top of that, you can just use this equipped on regular everyday creatures that have any kind of counters on them too. So this is a very solid card. And it shows Elspeth's new Halo Blade. This is most likely going to be instrumental in the battle against the Phyrexians. That's the way it appears that Wizards is positioning it. I would take it, I suppose, with a little bit like a grain of salt, just because it does seem like the story of New Capenna is somewhat fragmented, and Wizards doesn't always worry too much about continuing on with particular storylines. For example, Garruk and Liliana the Chainveil, that was tossed aside. Jace and Vraska and their intertwining and the memories that got erased and were to come back and everything, that got tossed aside. So ultimately, this may not be the final weapon that will be used to cast down Phyrexia, but that is how it appears. Now, that is the number 2 card coming in at $25. And if for some reason I got caught up and didn't tell you the prices of the Triomes, which I feel like I may have neglected to do, those also come in at $15 each, okay? So Luxior at $25, the Triomes at $15. Now, the number 1 card in the set, the most valuable by a large margin, is Bootlegger's Stash. This is 1 green and 5 for an artifact with a very simple and straightforward ability. It says, lands you control have tap, create a treasure token. The flavor text says, labyrinths of tunnels beneath the streets of the Chaldea offer an ample array of discrete routes for enterprising smugglers. So they just have all of this located down in the depths, down in the bowels of New Capenna, where the Riveteers lurk. And this is an absolutely bonkers card, right? All your lands just being able to generate extra. Here you go. These can either be used for extra mana or just as a ton of extra artifacts. This is a bonkers card, and it is almost twice as expensive as Luxior, coming in at $45. That is a massively beefcake price. And you look at the artwork, and you can see this is a bunch of bootlegged Halo. I don't know how you bootleg Halo now that I think about it. How do you bootleg Halo, considering it's a demonic process that was initiated by the archdemons to essentially drain the Halo out of the angels? How do you bootleg it? Bootlegging is when you make it yourself. Anyways, you know what? I'm going to get caught up on this. That wraps up the top 10 most valuable cards from Streets of New Capenna. My friends, I hope you enjoyed it. A big thank you to all of my patrons. And links on the screen if you want to hear about the New Capenna story action. See you next time, my friends.